I often say that the biggest threat to Australia is not aircraft, not a missile, and someone sitting with a laptop in a lounge room somewhere. And that's because information is such a critical part of everything. So information warfare is it's an overloaded term. The thing you were talking about, the misinformation, disinformation thing, is certainly is a real threat to societies everywhere. And so that is a way in which adversaries are using things like AI generation of fake images and pushing it to you because they profiled you and know what you like and don't like. So that's one form of information warfare, that misinformation, disinformation. So if you want to take down a city, what do? You take down the power, right? And so there are algorithms and hacks and malware created by adversaries to do things like that. So what we then need to do is build countermeasures to that, and trying to stay ahead of the game, ahead of your adversaries is very challenging as well.
Biggest threat to Australia isn't a missile, it isn't an aircraft, it's information warfare. It's someone with a laptop halfway around the world. Now that's not hyperbole, that's from Dr. Sanjay Mazumdar, a man who spent 3 decades at the bleeding edge of defence technology and AI. In this episode of Factory Fireside, we're going deep with someone who was writing neural networks in the early 1990s, before the internet, before open source, before most of us had even heard of machine learning. He was part of the team that built the world's first mobile wallet in 1999, and he's helped spawn some of Australia's leading intelligence companies who are now tracking terrorists globally using open source intelligence. And today, he's helping to deploy hundreds of millions of dollars in an effort to shape Australia's defence future through AI-driven intelligence, autonomous drones, quantum computing, and counter-cyber warfare. This is a masterclass from someone who's traversed almost every facet of the data and AI industry. Whether you're a founder trying to break into defence, or a corporate leader wondering if you're actually ready for AI, or just someone who wants to understand the invisible war being fought for your attention right now, this one's essential viewing. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hi everyone, Pete Inge, your host of Factory Fireside, and we're joined by Dr. Sanjay Mazumdar today. Really looking forward to diving into what is a really rich history in the data and AI space.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Great. Look, Sanjay, I want to take it to start a little down memory lane.
Yep.
I want to go back to the early 1990s. Now, when we think of the early 1990s, no internet, there's no cloud, Hadoop hasn't been invented yet. Open source, I think, was coined in the late 90s. And you're doing a PhD in neural networks. Can you take us back to that moment? What was it like then? And did you feel like you were too early at the time?
Yeah. Well, firstly, you're making me feel really old. Reminding me of all that. Yeah, look, I think certainly doing a PhD, working neural nets was really exciting. I mean, I was sort of at the vanguard of the area, the technology. And, you know, the original paper on neural nets sort of came about in the mid-80s. By a guy called Jeff Hinton, so it was only shortly after that. What was it like? Well, I mean, it was interesting because like there was no out of the box neural net, so you had to write your own code, you had to write your own net. So I had to write the back propagation algorithm and then train it. There wasn't as much data available back then, so to train it to do something useful was a challenging task, and you had to create synthetic data to train, and then to train something useful took forever. What I was trying to do is I was trying to train these networks to basically control nonlinear systems. So things like autopilots for ships or things like anti-skid brake system. So it would take forever to train a net to do that task. So as a PhD, it was fine, like because I was, proving some theory, proving something new and novel, which is what you're trying to do with a PhD. But in terms of being practical, it be practical. So you can't get a real-time system when you take a week to train it. So yeah, it was an interesting exercise. So definitely too early. Yeah, definitely too early. And in fact, that's what happened with the field. So neural nets sort of paused in about probably about 1994. Then called fuzzy logic came about, and there was a big push into fuzzy, and that paused again. So yeah, definitely too early. It wasn't really practical back then, but a lot of the fundamentals still exist now.
Yeah. And when you were doing that, did you have conviction that this would be turn into the fundamental game-changing technology that we see today?
Yeah. No, I didn't. But, it was given that it did take so long to train these things, I just thought, this isn't going to be really practical. And when I actually went back into the workforce, I sort of parked that and started to work on, more traditional methods for controlling systems, etc. And it wasn't really until probably early 2000s that I started to see things starting to reappear, and it wasn't really called AI, advanced analytics, whatever, machine learning, all that sort of stuff started to really reappear. So that was when I really started to think, oh, there's something here. And that sort of leads me to some of the stuff that we did after that.
Now, just in terms of, you have a really rich background. You've been in this field for such a long time. Just if you can give us a couple of minutes in terms of your journey.
I was doing the PhD when I was working in defence. So I was working for Defence Science Technology Group, on guidance and control systems. Hence, went back to defence, but then I did my undergraduate as an engineer, so I actually wanted to build stuff, not just do the research to a certain point. I actually wanted to build product. It's like Motorola set up here in Adelaide in around '96. So I went and joined Motorola. And when I was at Motorola, I was working at the bleeding edge of technology. The team developed the world's first mobile wallet back in 1999. Trials were successful, but no one was ready to buy goods on their phone back then. So talk about being too early. We were definitely too early. From Motorola, went to BAE. So I got into the big complex defense systems. Started to re-engage a little bit more around sort of data and AI back then. I guess the real big one was when I helped form the Data to Decisions CRC. We were focused on, at that stage, we were calling advanced analytics for national security, so intelligence, law enforcement, defence. So we were doing a lot of stuff looking at using computer vision techniques, semantic understanding, enterprise search and query to build systems. From there, went into consulting once the CRC closed down. Was with a chief data officer at one of the big four, and then moved into a sort of data and AI consulting with clients. And then from there, I've come here to the Defence Trailblazer, where we're doing a lot of work, funding a lot of projects in sort of the data and AI space, but also in a whole bunch of other areas.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Sanjay. Incredible journey. And we'll unpack that as we go through. But maybe let's go to the consulting chapter to start with. And often coming from hard engineering, we're building products, you've got these long cycles of development, and you land in as chief data officer. When you're in it, how are businesses thinking, and I guess the consultancy thinking about the adoption of advanced technology and AI?
So I think I had two parts to my career in consulting. So the first one as the CDO. The term CDO means different things to lots of different people. Yeah. What the role was actually about was about how do we sort of develop products and solutions to monetize the data that we had as a firm. So how do we take the data that we might have collected through audit, through advisory, and turn that into something that is, generates value for the firm, maybe might assist the consultants in doing what they're doing in a more streamlined manner. So that's what I originally thought I was going into. Other people in the firm, when they heard the term CDO, thought I was the traditional data governance type person, which I think is, in hindsight, was probably something that we should have thought about in terms of the title. I think the data governance side is really important. It's a hygiene factor, I used to say. It's the foundation of what you do. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is solve problems, generate value, etc. And so my focus was more on that side of it. So I was doing that for the first sort of year and a half, trying to build product solutions to monetize data. And then that part of the firm decided to sort of pivot a bit. And so I moved into the data and AI consulting, so working with clients. So this is going back to COVID times, was when I was there. And what I found when I was speaking to clients is, firstly, when you start to talk to them about AI, their eyes just glazed over. It's not like today where it's been democratized, people understand it, etc. Back then, even though it's only 5 years ago, people didn't quite get it. And they'd often come to me and they go, hey, I've got all this data. What do I do with it? And I'd sort of try and pause the conversation there and say, well, let's not start there. Let's start off with what's the business problems you're trying to solve. And let's have a discussion about that. Then we can talk about what data you actually need to solve that. And trying to get that change in thinking was I found part of the challenge, is getting people to start thinking about data as an enabler to solve business problems and generate value, rather than, I've got this data, I've got to do something about it. So yeah, it was an interesting journey.
Yeah, excellent. And look, it's super common. So I speak at a lot of board meetings and execs, and as I'm sure you do at the moment. And you kind of had the Chat GPT moment, right? That fundamentally changed people's perception of AI, and now everybody wants a slice. And we're in this sort of weird phase at the moment where people kind of want to rush into it. They don't really know exactly what it is they want. And like, I'm exactly the same as you in there. And I think that, for people listening, like, it's a great way for businesses to think about AI adoption is it's not a hammer looking for a nail. It always comes back to, what are you trying to do as a business? Like, what are the strategic priorities, the risks you're trying to manage, the innovation you're trying to drive? Because your whole business is structured around that, right? Like, you from your strategy to your business plan to your budgets to your performance frameworks, kind of all cascades down from there. And so solve a problem that's important to the organization. And so I kind of, I think we're really well aligned in the way that about the communication of that. And it's hard coming in as a hard tech person to not solutionize immediately, to go, what you need is this. It's, well, let's unpack the problem a little bit further and see what the right solution is. Because one of the things we see a lot of is the best solution to that problem is not AI. It might be process. Stop doing that. Like, it's just a basic dashboard or something like that gives you line of sight. It's really important to work through that. In your experiences, like in the consult space, how did you find that with the clients as well? How they typically took to that?
Yeah, well, look, I think the first warning sign for me was whenever we try and set up a meeting and you get the CIO in the meeting, right? Because for me, that was an indicator that that organization thinks that it's a technology-driven thing, not a business value thing. No, I often used to say, look, I don't really want to meet with the CIO at the moment. I think I need to meet with you as the business owner, or at least the CFO or the CEO. So I guess that was the first thing. Trying to get people not to delve down into the solutions was really difficult, and lifting them back up to, well, what's the business problem, the question you want to answer, etc. So we would always try and steer the conversation back to that. I could see that being, I could see the challenge today. Like, there's a term I've used a few times called AI envy. So people were envious of everyone else deploying AI, and they go, well, we need to have some of that as well. So they immediately jump to, well, we need AI, and it's, as you say, it's might not be the right solution. So how do you convince people to go back to what is the business outcome you're trying to achieve? And let's have a conversation about that. And then we'll work out what's the best way to achieve that.
Yeah, cool. Just to sort of go back to, you talk about engaging with the CIO, and we talked about you going in as a CDO, a very, very large organization, and then interacting with a lot of people. Like, almost every place I go to, the CDO does something different. Like, the definition and understanding of the CDO is fundamentally different. And it is very much, a lot of it is they are the custodian of governance within the organization, and they'll write the policies and they'll police that and all that kind of stuff. Really keen on your thoughts on, if you're going to have a chief data officer, what should their remit do? They're going to have the best opportunity to create value within the organization.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the secret. Like, it's about creating value. So I actually think, that's why I made that comment about, when I was at KPMG, the title perhaps wasn't the right title. It probably should have been something to reflect the fact we're about to generate business value, monetize the data, etc. Because I do think that too often people, when they see the CDO title, they think it's the data guardian, protector of the data, create all the data governance frameworks, etc. And those things are absolutely important, but you don't want that to be the means to the end. You don't want that to be the focus. So that's the thing we used to talk to clients about, is like, what we want to do is to help you address your business challenges. In doing so, what we'll do is we'll build out that foundational element. But if you just focus on building out the foundational element, you'll spend years doing that. Suddenly you'll get the CEO going, hang on, I've been spending $2 million on this data governance framework. What's the business value I'm getting out of this?
Yeah. Look, I'm with you as well. And for like people listening, like, I see it as a far more expansive role, is that when you think about value creation, and data governance is kind of adjacent in many ways to that. And I've seen too many programs held up. It's like, we need to get this massive structure in place. We know all of our policies, all our procedures defined, and then we're going to build our platform. We're going to bring stuff in, and like you said, you're $2 million in 12 months, and you've got nothing to show for it. And so that idea of the CDO role being like sort of far more expansive, if you're going to go down that path, you empower them to run and own the execution of the program, which when I say write the strategy, effectively the driver of the architecture, the capability that works on that, the way that you look at you delivering and executing value within the business, like the whole life cycle, if it coalesces under one person, one leadership, for me, like that's what the CDO role is.
Yeah. And I think a good telltale sign of what an organization thinks of what the CDO role is where the CDO role sits, right? If it sits in the CIO under the CIO, which it does in a lot of organizations, then that tells you that the focus is really just on technology, not on the outcome. If it sits under the CEO or CMO or something like that, CRO, then you know that it's more about business value creation. And so I think that's also a good indicator of what a particular organization thinks. And I've dealt with both. I've dealt with some organizations that felt it's just a technology play, had it sitting under the CIO, focused just on the sort of data governance framework, etc. And I've had other organizations where they realize, this is actually about us creating potentially new business value, new lines of business.
Yeah. So I get asked this question a lot as well. Like, where should it sit in your mind? If it's going to create most value in an organization, where would you put it?
Yeah. So I think it either sits directly under the CEO or potentially, with a chief marketing officer or a chief revenue officer or something like that, where it shows that it's all about, actually creating value for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably one of the other things I want to dive into here a little bit, when we think about, in particular, your experiences in terms of being a product builder and for many years, and we'll get into the CRC experiences and what spawned out of that. And then just to stay on the consult thread for a little bit there is that when we look at the data and AI space, the idea of like where does value really create when you have something deployed, adopted, used in a way that it can create value? Where do you think consulting is strong in that space, and where do you think they're maybe not so aligned?
Yeah, so I think where I see sort of the biggest consulting firms having real strength is at that sort of strategy and advisory side of things, because they have a lot of different clients across a lot of different fields, so they get opportunities to cherry pick, what works well, etc., lessons learned, all that. And that can really help inform the strategy side of it, the advisory side of it. Also, they often have tentacles into other parts of the financial side of things, the overall business strategy, etc. So I think there is real strength and value in what they can provide there. Where I think that they have challenges, and this is the bigger ones, the Big Four, for example, is they have an audit practice and they have an advisory practice. Because as an audit practice, there are certain things you can and can't do on the advisory side of things. So there's some inherent barriers to doing the advisory implementation work. I think the other bit is that because there is an audit practice, there is a risk appetite, that's a lot more conservative because you have to as an audit thing. And so that necessarily means that it's difficult to explore new technologies, new ways of working, be a bit agile, be a bit on the edge, all those sorts of things. And so I think sometimes, and I found myself that it was harder to do implementation type projects in that sort of environment. And I think also just the whole structure, like the partnership structure, isn't geared up to supporting product development, because product development is like a hockey stick, right? You make a loss at the beginning and then you sort of generate revenue downstream, which isn't the way a partnership works. I'm a big believer in you got to stick with your DNA, and I think if implementation is in your DNA, then they're the sort of right companies or firms to really work with in terms of the implementation side, because they get it, they get what it takes to actually build, deploy, support something, and all the process practice, the teams, the staff is all geared around that. So I do think there's room for both. I think where we've found some of the bigger companies, what they're doing is they're requiring to do the second bit, which is fine in terms of bringing capability in, but you don't want to then, I used to use this term at BAE because we used to acquire a lot of companies. You don't want to smother them with governance love, right? And apply all these processes and practice that aren't suited to an agile implementation environment.
And so this is maybe a little more of a pointed question. We can take it out if you. But so what does it mean for the consultancies? Like obviously there's all this stuff coming out at the moment. I think probably has for a long time about the failure rates of these projects. So Do they find their niche in here? Do they continue on as is?
Yeah.
Or do they expand downstream into implementation and deployment?
Yeah, well, look, I think they're all looking at the implementation side. I guess the question is, do they go it alone? Do they partner, etc.? So a lot of them are starting to partner, whether it be with the Microsofts of this world or whether it be with smaller implementation houses. And maybe it's a hybrid model that might work well. So they then take the bigger risk and bring in the capability as required. But I think it's about finding the right mix and drawing upon your strengths and maybe then bringing in the strengths of others as well.
Yeah, that's good. It's just look, that's great. I mean, I spent a long time in the consulting world as well, and you talk about being a builder and what's in your DNA. Like, I love to build stuff, and that was always part of my challenge. Was I wanted to build products, wanted to deploy products. I kind of have a feeling that success in this space is almost like a vertically integrated stack. That's what we've tried to do here with Insight Factory. Is you have the platform, you have the product, you have the people, you build solutions, and you can support it because you have a clear path to production. You have people who are experts in the technology, but you have a clear shot to product. It's really bloody hard to go into a new organization with technologies you're not an expert in, deployment processes you're not familiar with, or you have to build them and write them yourself. I just think it makes that path extremely hard. And I think that we'll see a shift in that. And that's what we're trying to drive here at Insight Factory is that, what is the clear path to production there? So I just want to, again, sort of keep working through some of your experiences. And one I love is the defense side of things in here. And so what you're doing with defense Trailblazer at the moment, can you just unpack for us a little bit about what it is and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So Defense Trailblazer is a collaboration between, we have probably about 200 industry partners. So these are small to medium enterprises largely, so about 90% of SMEs working in the defence space. We've got universities and we've got obviously close partnerships with defence. And the aim is really to try and bring together the industry and universities so that they can commercialise some of the leading edge research that's going on within the universities. Because as a country, we're really good at, we bat above our weight when it comes to research, but we're very poor at the translation and commercialisation of the research. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to bridge that gap. So we're about $240 million of funding that we're deploying to fund these sorts of projects. And we're sort of focused on three major areas. So one is funding large-scale R&D projects. So these are projects anywhere up to $50 million. We do a lot of work around workforce, so funding PhD students, interns, etc., to work in industry and really bridge that gap between unis and industry. And then we have a sort of incubation acceleration program where we help fund startups and scale-ups. And part of our role is really to work with defence to identify what their priority needs are and then work with our industry and academic partners to shape projects to match those needs. So it is a needs-driven, mission-driven approach that we're trying to drive. And in defence, really the sort of key areas that defence is currently looking at as priorities are things like, so put aside the submarines, which is obviously a major area, but it's things like robotics, autonomous systems and AI. It's things like cyber and information warfare, hypersonics, quantum and space technology. And so you'll probably, as I described that, you'll probably see that data and AI is actually a key enabler for pretty much all those areas. And so there is a big focus in what we do in sort of using data and AI capabilities to solve defence problems.
Yeah. And maybe just an example of some of the really cool projects that you're working on.
Sure.
Are we going to see robot soldiers in the future and all that kind of stuff?
Well, what we're going to see, to some degree, there is a big focus on autonomy and robots and things like that. So what we want to do is to try and take as much as possible the human out of danger. And so a lot of focus is on drone technology. So, and that people think when I talk drones, they might think of those little toy drones, you can buy down at JB or whatever, but these are large scale drones, so both UAVs, so unmanned uncrewed, aerial vehicles, so big planes, through to UUVs, water, autonomous platforms, through to ground ones. And so we're trying to, as much as possible, put autonomy into the battlefield to take the human out of it. The human will never be completely out. Obviously the human's the ultimate maker, but you can put those autonomous platforms there. So there's a lot of work going on in terms of both drones and counter drones. So how do you take down drones? Swarms of drones. A lot of work going on in that space as well.
How does Australia position within this? I know that you take the US and you've got significant funding, and you've got companies like Anduril and all that kind of stuff with sort of private development. You've got China with massive capability in manufacturing and accelerating their AI. How does Australia play in this?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously those two big markets and big players, and they're always going to have deeper pockets, etc. What we have done here in Australia is really tried to focus in on what we need given our strategic context. So we have certain, geography, certain potential threats. So let's focus in on those things, and let's sort of partner with our allies, what we call the Five Eye Nations, and partner with them to support. But there are some areas where we do have a natural advantage. So we do a lot of work in the autonomy space, and part of that is because of sort of threats we have. We do a lot of work in the cyber and information warfare space, and that's once again because of the types of threats we have, etc. But I guess for a company trying to sell into defence will never be able to survive just on Australian defence, because we'll buy 1, 2, 5 of anything. So you can build the technology, prove it here in Australia, but you have to scale globally. And that's the things we tell our startup companies when they're sort of looking at defence as a market. Prove it here, scale it global. Just
really keen to unpack, you mentioned information warfare. And we hear like an enormous amount about this, and it can mean a lot of things. Obviously, there's you've got all the evolution of like AI capabilities now that you can have political, economic, media, social influence through misinformation. It's a terrifying time. Like as a parent of young kids, right? It's a terrifying time of what could happen. You can see some of the things that are playing out globally around political influence and the ability to manipulate markets and all that kind of stuff through all this. It's kind of mind blowing. And then when you think about, when GPT-5 came out and you get down and you read the system card and whatever, an enormous amount of effort going into being able to stop cyber, biological, chemical, negative adverse outcomes going on there. In terms of, can you just unpack a little bit of like what information warfare means in your world?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I mean, I often say that the biggest threat to Australia is not aircraft, not a missile, someone sitting with a laptop in a lounge room somewhere, and that's because information is such a critical part of everything. So information warfare is it's an overloaded term, just like AI is an overloaded term as well. The thing you were talking about, the misinformation, disinformation thing, is certainly a real threat to societies everywhere. Influencing politics, use techniques to influence people's thinking around that, reinforce people's inherent biases about what they thought by pushing out content to them that reinforce that someone might be in favour of this or someone might be against that. And so that is a way in which we, adversaries are using things like AI generation of fake images and things like that. The whole fake news term is all about pushing content to people to reinforce their beliefs. And so there's algorithms out there that are creating that content and pushing it to you because they profiled you and know what you like and don't like. So that's one form of information warfare, that misinformation, disinformation. And if you think about that to some degree is what people used to do with dropping pamphlets with propaganda in the First World War and Second World War. So it's similar, but it's been accelerated through the use of technology. So that's one form of information warfare. But information warfare also covers things like cyber warfare. So actually putting malware and threats onto your computer networks, and that's quite disruptive to societies. So if you think about things like critical infrastructure, energy, water, things like that, all of that now is instrumented. It's all connected to the internet. So if you want to take down a city, what do? You take down the power, right? And so there are algorithms and hacks and malware created by adversaries to do things like that. So what we then need to do is build counters to that. Just like you have counter drones, you have counter cyber threats as well. So it's an area that is evolving at 1 million miles an hour. That's the challenge, and trying to stay ahead of the game, ahead of your adversaries, is very challenging as well.
Yeah, and just to sort of loop back to the first one, like we live in this crazy world of echo chambers now. So you got this compounding effect of I can create misinformation, I can create deep fakes and avatars of people who spread stuff. And then I have platforms like TikTok and X that just feed me the content that I want to hear. And so constantly you can just reinforce, like it's a megaphone like we've never had.
Exactly.
And it is now extremely dangerous in there.
And it's being supercharged by generative AI.
Absolutely. So on that one, so what do we do? How do we counter that?
And look, I think there's a lot of discussion, debate about it. So one approach people are looking at is, do we put guardrails and do we put constraints around how these things can be used, etc. But the challenge with guardrails is someone will always work their way around it, right? Now, if you go back 15, 20 years when people were looking at things like digital rights management, DRM, where they were putting watermarks on audio content so people couldn't copy those. And so people are talking about, needing to put watermarks on to show what's AI generated. Now, that's all great if you're a law-abiding citizen.
That's right.
But if you're an adversary who's not abiding by laws, they're not going to do that. So I think some of those techniques are flawed. What we are trying to do is, so we've got a few projects that we're actually funding where we're looking at the ability to detect fake news, and there's techniques you can start to use to try and detect what is real, what's not real, what's a real source, what's not a real source. Does that source present a profile which looks like it's a real thing, or is it a bot, etc. So I think to some degree it's about trying to detect and then also trying to prevent. So prevent and detect are the key areas. But I do think, and this is perhaps it's a bit soapboxy for me, but a lot of the focus in Australia over the last few years around AI has been around just put in play. Let's look at the ethics of AI, and absolutely you have to. Let's put guardrails in, and yes, you need guardrails. But if you make that your primary focus and your primary defense, people will just work their way around it. Yeah.
Just to continue that thread along, because it's really interesting. So probably plays into two parts that we see a lot. So we go and talk to people about AI, and you get the people that are all in, they want the value creation, and the counter of the story is the risk, and we've got to set up our ethical frameworks and all these types of things before we do anything in that space. How would you respond to that? In that you're in a situation where someone's saying, I want to move forward, but before we do that, we're going to have to put all this ethical AI and responsible AI in place before we do anything. How would you counsel someone considering that?
Yeah, look, I mean, those things are, are essential and fundamental. You shouldn't. I'm a big believer is don't lead with that. Like you gotta lead with here is the opportunity that we're looking to create. Here's the benefit we're trying to generate. Yes, as we address those, we're going to put in place the appropriate frameworks, checks and balances, and those sorts of things. But I think leading with that, which is I think part of what has happened in Australia over the last few years, we're leading with that. To some degree, we've missed opportunities to create value. I think that's not the right approach. I do think, though, we do need to we don't want to create an environment where it's a bit like the Wild West and people are just going out there and deploying AI solutions willy-nilly without giving thought to that piece. So it's about bringing into their consciousness that they need to think about how they're protecting their data, how they're validating their algorithms, how they're, providing some transparency and all that sort of stuff. But let's not miss the business opportunity that it provides as well. I think sometimes the pendulum's gone a bit too much that way.
Just to continue that line of thought, one of probably, if not the major challenge to bringing in modern lakehouses, unlock AI capability within most sort of normal organizations is sort of navigating cybersecurity. Having spent a lot of time in defense and some of the work you've done is we tend to find the default to the hardest position.
Yeah.
Which is, you want to do this, here's the 220 questions you need to fill out, and it's just extremely difficult process to navigate. Look, and rightfully so, you want to protect your information and your data, and we see data breaches and all that kind of stuff all the time, but our perspective here is don't let it slow your momentum. Having worked in, I guess, the highest level of classification in terms of data security and having to navigate that, if you think about transference to everyday organizations that are dealing with this stuff, how would you counsel them to approach that?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. So there's a fitness for purpose type of approach you need to take. Yes, when you're dealing with highly classified data and, the consequence of that data being leaked is significant, then you've got to go all the way across. In other contexts, you may be able to sort of loosen the reins a bit. So I think taking a risk-based approach is important with this. In the defence world, when we do talk about risks, and particularly when we talk about risks around system safety or cybersecurity, we often use this concept called ALARP, so as low as reasonably practicable. So you put in measures to counter those risks that are reasonably practicable. So I think it's a case of working out or taking a risk lens to it. What is the risk of something going wrong, and then applying a fit for purpose solution to that, rather than just defaulting immediately to locking everything down. And we even see that in the defence world. Like, it's far easier to just overclassify everything. You think it's far easier, but then what it ends up doing is constraining you from doing anything. So it's about finding that right level of classification for your and some bits are unclassified, some bits have to be top secret, etc. So So I think taking a sort of a risk-based approach, but a fitness for purpose type approach.
Yeah, excellent. So one area I'm really excited to move into, and I just kind of the entrepreneur within me is really interested in the D2D CRC, and some of the obviously some of the amazing things that have spun out of that tremendously successful program. You were obviously the lead of that. Can you just give us the backstory on what it was?
Sure. So D2D CRC, Data to Decisions Cooperative Research Centre. So a cooperative research centre, much like the Trailblazer, is a collaboration between industry, academia, and an end user. So in our case, the end user was national security, but there are CRCs in health, other areas, etc. It's a federal government program where they fund these consortium. The thing with the program is you have to be solving a problem that's of national significance. So it's a grand challenge, burning platform problem, however you want to describe it. So when we formulated, three of us founded D2D, so myself and two other guys that I'd worked with previously at BAE. When we founded it, it was because there was a recognition that in the defence, intelligence and law enforcement community, they were being swamped with data but starving of information. And what I mean by that is lots and lots of data being generated, but they're looking for that sort of needle in that data haystack in whatever they do. So a law enforcement person's trying to find someone who's committed a particular crime. They got all this data they have to sift through. How do they find that one person, etc.? So we recognised that this was becoming an increasing challenge because we're generating more and more data. I mean, we're generating data as we speak. And the policing and law intelligence folks were literally still using, still in some cases we went into one of the policing agencies and they were still using the pins on the boards and the strings between,
That's a real thing.
It's a real thing, right? So people think, oh, well, it's not like Minority Report where they've got screens and it was far from it. And so we recognised there was an opportunity there to start to use, advanced analytics and a lot of what people call AI now to help automate that process, to help find that needle in the data haystack, and to help detect anomalies and raise to those investigators something they need to look at in more detail. And so that was the concept behind it. When we started speaking to the agencies, and the first thing we started to do with them is basically trying to unpack what are their burning platform problems. And so we started to, where data analytics could help them, we started to get a list, yay long. So we really need to work with them, and now people will call this co-creation, but back then we were just working with them to try and work out, well, what are the 5-6 key use cases that data and AI could help them with, and let's try and prioritize those. And so what we ended up with a handful of use cases that we then built our projects around, our research projects and our sort of solutions around, and that's eventually what ended up becoming our startup companies. But yeah, it was really a user-driven approach, focusing on what were their pain points, their burning platform problems today.
And I guess you talk about solving problems of national security and stuff, but the philosophy of that shouldn't change, right? In every business, is what are your big business problems that I'm trying to solve here? And just to keep one of the things I know we've spoken about this before on the co-creation model in there and the value of that. And so one of the things we see a lot of is this almost incumbent belief in the market that I can bring a team in for 6 weeks or 8 weeks and build something that's going to make impact and difference. It's not really how the world of data and AI solutioning works. Now, I know we've spoken previously about how the value of co-creation and working side by side and the long tail development. Can you just unpack for us a little bit about how that co-creation model worked and why it was successful?
Yeah, so I think the key thing for us, and the reason why it was successful, is that we had people from the agencies sitting hand in glove with our development team and with our researchers, so that we would work with them to identify the problem, right? We would then start to build that, release it to them, get them to play around with it, get them to use it, give us feedback, do it the next increment, etc. Build our backlog of features that we would implement. So we're always working with them. So one of our startups, the tagline was built with investigators for investigators, and that was because we had an AFP detective superintendent running that program with our dev team, and that gave us that constant connection to the end user, who ultimately was the person who was going to use the solution. And I think having that from the get-go all the way through to the end was invaluable, right? So yeah, often when people talk about co-creation, I think just about the beginning piece, but it's a complete journey across the whole life cycle, and that was really hugely valuable for us. I think what was also hugely valuable was the fact that we could sort of give them an initial solution. They would play around with it. They would give us feedback. We would iterate, etc. The interesting piece of that is, so the way we structure our projects is we had the core development team, and then we had the research team. The research team were actually looking at some of those features that our end users had told us they wanted, but they probably weren't the immediate ones. They were the ones that we, maybe in a year's time we'll bring that research in, we'll productize it and integrate it, because research works at research pace, and we were working at the pace of the threat environment, which was far quicker.
And so just in terms of one of the narratives that we're trying to reinforce in market here is that this takes time, and there's inherent uncertainty. When you go into these things, you have no idea of the quality of the data you need to pull in, what you're going to be able to do with it, the quality of the models you might be able to build, how end users are going to respond to that. You've got this inherent uncertainty. Can you maybe just drill into a little bit about how long these took and the way you guys managed, or I guess project managed, product managed the uncertainty?
Yeah, so I mean the CRC in itself was 5 years, but I guess the projects, it took us about a couple of years to get to the point where we had something that we knew that there was a commercial potential for, right? And that's when we started to create the spin-out companies, when we realised there was a commercial potential for them. But to get to that point, not only did we have to go through that process of identifying, what's the priority use case to solve, which is that's not a trivial exercise. That takes time, right? And so that took time. Then actually starting to build the solution, as you say, looking at the data sets you could get access to, etc., looking at how you might supplement that, etc., we had a couple of false starts. So originally, one of the solutions is now the base of a company called Fivecast. So it does open.
Company,
So it's about 150 people globally, based here in Adelaide.
Yeah.
So that solution is using open source data, so open source intelligence, to profile people of interest. So originally we started off with building profiles of people who might be engaged in terrorist type activities. It's then morphed into a whole bunch of things. That originally we were focused on a defence use case, but we quite quickly realised to get the data to build a solution in a defence context was far more problematic, because you had, firstly the classification issue where a lot of that data was in the top secret domain. Building a solution as a commercial company in a top secret domain is very challenging, etc. So we pivoted to the burning platform problem, which we had at that time, remembering it's about 2016, which is about counter-terrorism. Yeah. And we could build a solution using open source data, social media data and other freely available data. So that was same burning platform problem, different context, different data sources, more readily available data we could more easily validate, etc. And so sometimes it's, that source of, the data is the engine for the engine for all this AI. So you've got to make sure you've got the right data. So it is a longish process to go through. Yeah. And then the other bit is, it's great to build a prototype in the lab, but how do you build something that's scalable on a global basis? And that a lot of engineering effort went into that. So the data engineering effort to build a solution that could ingest large volumes of data and be scaled, etc. A lot of focus went into that.
Yeah, and so that's great. The idea of kind of these long chains, you come up with really important problems, you co-create, you build something, you're integrating research in there, and eventually you get into a point where you've got something that's commercially viable. There's been some amazing companies that have spun. Obviously, Fivecast is a great example of an amazing South Australian company that is doing amazing things globally. I think Inquiry was another one that came out of that as well. Just for, we have a lot of students that tune into this as well, that might be thinking about their next big AI venture and becoming, the next billion-dollar company in Australia. Just that experience of taking some really smart, motivated people, good idea, you build your prototype to like a commercial success. If you were going to advise some of the ambitious young entrepreneurs here, what was it that from some of those companies that kind of made it successful beyond the CRC?
Yeah, so I think first thing is was that work we did right at the beginning to identify what the burning platform problem was. I think the fact that we had built the two companies around real problems that people had to get solved, it had to be solved, gave them a heads up, right? A real leg up. So that's one thing, like really identifying what is the problem in the market that needs to be solved. The second thing was it was actually recognising that in order to do that, we had to access top talent. So, we built a team, we recruited people that a lot of the people, myself and Brenton, who is the CTO of D2D, now the CEO of Fivecast, we had worked with previously and we knew were high pedigree people. We then supplemented that with a lot of, students, researchers, etc. Once again, top talent. Well, nothing beats top talent, right? Particularly in this space, which you're trying to develop really innovative solutions. The other bit for me is we had a team which brought different strengths to the table. So I guess, Brenton, incredibly smart guy, knew the technology inside and out, etc. I brought in sort of that commercial experience and building teams, building product, etc. Our chair came from the national security environment. He knew all the key stakeholders. He knew what problems needed to be solved, etc. So it's building the right team as well was really important. We found that first reference client, so in our case it was the Australian agencies, that first reference client who with the people that who we co-created with was incredibly important in terms of scaling, particularly in our sector where you can't just knock on a national security agency door and say, hey, by the way, I'm Fivecast, can I sell you a solution?
Yeah.
Right, you have to be introduced to them. So having that reference client was incredibly important as well. I think the other bit is, not being afraid to pivot. Yeah. So with Fivecast, the two big solutions that ultimately went into Fivecast, so there was two projects we'd funded, one which was called Beat the News, the other one which was called Apostle. Beat the News is about predicting events, so beating the news. Yeah. Apostle was about basically formulating a sort of a picture of the world, so like an apostle does, right? So that's the risk profile. We realised that Beat the News, it wasn't the right solution for the problem, and so we actually stopped that project, right? So being able to make those hard calls because the market either is not ready for it or is not looking for it is something you got to be willing to do as well. Yeah. But the other thing I'll probably just highlight is, we created an environment where people loved working there as well. Like, they are working on innovative stuff at the bleeding edge, leading edge, but we had fun, all that sort of stuff as well. So I think that was the other bit, like creating a fun environment.
Yeah, awesome. No, look, I'm 100% with you on the people, the brain power. And one of the things, we love about here at Insight Factory is we try to find the smartest, most motivated young people we can. You get them together and, amazing things start to happen. You look back at some of the greatest companies in the world have been formed by 20 year olds. It's right now with all the changes that are coming through, all the stuff in agentic AI. And I mean, this is all brand new, right? I've been in this field for a long time. And nobody has like 20 years experience in this space, right? This is brand new. And some of the work our young guys are doing is just mind blowing. It's really exciting. On the technology front, I just want to get your read on what you're most excited about. So the next 12 to 24 months in evolving technology.
Yep. Yeah, so I guess I've got the good fortune with the Defence Trailblazer to see some of the more innovative stuff that's occurring in defence, and defence is often a leader, like has been traditionally, of technology. And the one that probably excites me the most is around quantum computing, right? Don't ask me to explain how it works because I still don't. It goes all the way back to quantum mechanics and things having more than one state. We won't go into that. But I think if quantum computing really gets commercial scalability, then its ability to change what we do, all computing now, is quite significant. And basically the long and the short of quantum computing is that it makes the ability to process whatever algorithms, etc., quicker, more, you can start to do things at more scale, etc. That opens up huge opportunities. It also opens up a few risks as well. But I think that's the one. Australia is actually one of the world leaders in quantum computing. So two of our partners spin-outs from University of New South Wales, UNSW, and they're actually one of the 6 companies in a big DARPA, so Defence Research Challenge globally. So Australia really bats above its weight in quantum computing. But if we can get the scalability, if we can get it down from, at the moment a quantum computer is large, needs really significant cooling, etc., to operate, still can only do fairly simplistic operations. But if we can get it down to a form factor where it's like a chip in a laptop, so there's a lot of work going on around quantum on silicon, so you can get onto a silicon type chip and use silicon fabrication processes, then your ability to crunch through numbers, process images, all that sort of stuff goes from seconds to that. And I think that's what that will be the big game changer.
And I think one of the things that you hear a lot about, and I was reading about Ethereum, and the unlock of quantum potentially unlocks the encryptions on things like Bitcoin and crypto.
Yeah, and this is the risk side of it, right? And actually just recently, the head of the Australian Signals Directorate, which is the main sort of signals intelligence group in Australia, talked about the risk of quantum computing, and its ability to potentially crack a lot of the encryption that's out there. Because encryption, a lot of the encryption techniques survive in the fact that you can't basically put enough compute power to crack the algorithms because of the size of the keys and etc. But if quantum becomes commoditized, that the potential is there to crack those algorithms, and therefore all the encryption we have on our communication and things like that then get compromised. So that's the risk side of it. The opportunity side is the other bit about being able to crunch through lots and lots of data.
Yeah, that's right. The P equals NP or P doesn't equal NP equation comes into play. Look, just on probably one thing on more of a personal note, as a CEO of a tech company and as someone who's been a long time leader of technology companies in different capacities, what makes a good tech CEO, and what are some of the things that potentially I'm a little off script here because I'm just interested in getting your perspective on this.
It's a good question to ask. So I think a lot of time people go into technologies because they love solving problems, right? I often describe an engineer as a technical detective, right? Because you're trying to solve a problem, but you're using technology to solve the problems. So I think a good tech CEO is someone who is constantly looking to solve problems. We talked about creating value. That's one of the things that we always try and do: generate value, solve problems. Right. I think a good tech CEO needs to constantly keep abreast of the direction of technology. Where's it heading? Where's the opportunity? What does quantum mean for me as a business? Well, what does generative AI, agentic AI, all those sorts of things mean for me as a business? So really staying abreast of that. There are obviously the standard CEO things and being a good leader and having a strategic mindset and building a culture and all that. But I think what differentiates a tech CEO from all of that is those things about still having that desire to stay across the technology, where it's going. You may not be cutting code, like I haven't cut code for quite a while. I keep saying I'm a PowerPoint engineer or an Excel engineer, so probably a macro is probably the closest I get. But I think you still have an understanding of how technology can impact business, whether it be positively or negatively on the risk side. And I think that's something that you want to ensure a tech CEO has, and that's why I'm a big believer in you can't just fly in someone who might be a CEO of a financial services company to run a tech company, right? And because I think having that, it's literally having that domain understanding that is critically important as well.
And you sit on boards and stuff like that as well. What are some of the signs, I'm thinking for myself, that the CEO is kind of drifting off point?
Yeah, look, I think sometimes it's where the CEO gets too caught up in sort of the nitty-gritty day-to-day, all that sort of stuff, and doesn't maintain that like strategic mindset and thinking a few steps ahead. You always got to be thinking a few steps ahead, and that's, I think, more of a strategic mindset. I think also the other bit for me, and I'm a big people person, so I tend to want to try and ensure that I create an environment where my staff feel empowered, feel like they're contributing, etc. I think where you start to find CEOs where it's all just about the numbers. It's not about the people. It's not about the culture. It's not about the difference we're making. It's all about the numbers. Yeah. And you often get bean counter CEOs out there. I think that's when you start to worry that we're not sort of heading in the right direction. We're just managing for today. Yeah. We're not thinking about tomorrow.
Yeah. Awesome. Last question for today. In terms of we sort of let's take defence, sort of technology companies and consultants, like out of it. The everyday sort of people that are leading businesses there, maybe 2 or 3 concrete things for them to help prepare for the AI wave that's coming.
Yeah, so I think firstly for me it's like try and build your AI IQ. So irrespective of who you are, you might be CEO of a utility, right? Try and build your AI IQ. And what I mean by that is really try and understand what are the opportunities and what are the risks that AI means for my organisation. I think that's the first thing you need to do. I think then look at your business and look at, and you might need support with all this, but look at where are the opportunities for me to be able to look at potentially deploying AI to help automate something, open up a new business line, etc. Right? So how might I use AI to help me as a business create more value or take cost out of the business, right? And so that sort of AI, I'll call it an assessment or audit, whatever you want to call it, I think is an important second step as well. And then I think think about how you're going to build up your data and AI capability, because everyone has to have it. Now that could be internal, or it could be engaging with partners, whatever the approach you take. I think once you've sort of done those first two steps, I think about how do you build up your capability.
Yeah.
So I think that they're probably the three things that I would suggest that any organisation, irrespective of what domain they're in, need to start thinking about.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you, mate. You've been amazing. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I know you're a busy man, so I'll let you get back to your day. But look, thank you so much for coming in. Really enjoyed it. Thanks Sanjay. Yeah, wonderful. Cheers. Before we wrap up, a quick word from InsightFactory.ai. We're a leading provider of data and AI solutions, and we represent the next generation of data and AI enablement companies. We're fully vertically integrated, delivering the complete stack, including platform, products, people, solutions, production support, and methodology, all working together to help organisations move from ideas to real production deployed outcomes. And if you're earlier in the journey, we also help with the strategy piece, from setting the vision and value case through to the roadmap and operating model to make it stick. If you'd like to learn more or explore how we could help, reach out. We'd love to chat. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.